They must sleep in this center at night, segregated from the Israeli public, for fear that they will assimilate.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 22 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org, our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. As promised, we'll have on the program the second part of Max Blumenthal's talk at Central Connecticut State University. Blumenthal, a journalist and author, has just finished Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. We begin where he left off, talking about how Israeli authorities want to throw Israeli citizens off their land because these citizens are Bedouin Palestinians. We also get into how he first covered Israel and Palestine in 2009 when he explored Israeli racism in the video that went viral, which was called Feeling the Hate in Jerusalem. Then we talk about the climate. You probably have heard that the State Department issued a report giving a green light to the Keystone XL pipeline. They argued in this report that this pipeline would have no climate impact, even though it was bringing the dirtiest carbon-rich fuel on Earth into the climate. It would have no impact because, in their curious and false reasoning, the fuel was going to be dug up and burned anyway, so the pipeline couldn't have any effect. When the news got out, plans were made for hundreds of demonstrations that took place just a few days later. We covered the one that took place in New Haven at the tail end of a snowstorm. At the rally, we met Katie Myers, who had been arrested last November in Stamford, where her group did a demonstration against mountaintop coal mining, an extreme form of strip mining. She brought us up to date on what's going on in her upcoming trial. We start in front of the JIMO Federal Building in New Haven.
Hey, Obama, we don't want no climate drama. 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 We're here today to say that even though the State Department put out a sham report that the Keystone XL won't cause climate damage, that we still want it to be stopped. Not only because it exacerbates climate change, but because it hurts the people of Canada, causing cancers and diseases and taking over their land. It hurts the people of Nebraska and the heartland by hurting their farmland and threatening their water. And we don't need it. We can be 100% renewable energy in 10 or 20 years by taking advantage of current technology. We don't need this oil, and even if we did need this oil, we wouldn't get this oil because it's flowing down through the United States to refineries in Texas so they can ship it out to international markets like China and Asia and Australia, and so that we wouldn't even get the benefits of this oil, we only get the risk and the harm. So please, Obama, reject the Keystone KXL, Kerry, reject the KXL, and everybody go renewable.
As we record this, news has come that Richard Trumka, the head of the AFL-CIO Labor Federation, has come out in support of Keystone XL pipeline. Evidently, he reasons a couple thousand construction jobs and to hell with the climate.
My name is Katie Myers. I'm 20 years old, and I was arrested just before Thanksgiving, sitting in front of a bank called UBS. I think it's United Bank of Switzerland. And what they do is they invest in mountaintop removal coal mining, which is what makes that dying industry of coal still possible, is investments from banks like UBS. So, in case you don't know, mountaintop removal is where they blow up a mountain to get to the coal, and what that does is it destroys an ancient ecosystem. It rains rubble down on towns and villages below it, and it pollutes all the water in the area. So what happens is that you get towns sitting below these mountaintop removal sites, which, by the way, look like moonscapes. They're absolutely devastated. And like one person in every household in these towns has cancer. It's absurd. And somehow UBS is still investing in these companies. So we wanted to stand up and say, no, we will not let this happen anymore. But technically, in Connecticut, what we did was illegal, so we got arrested, and now we've been charged with trespassing, disturbance of the peace, and conspiracy on both those counts. Conspiracy is historically a charge that is used to subdue people who band together in groups to make change. But we will not be subdued. We still want to speak out for mountaintop removal. We will not pay the restitution, and we will not just let this go away.
Can we go back a step? Describe your action in detail.
So there were two actions. One group, of which I was not a part, climbed a crane, a construction crane, and hung a banner down from the construction crane all the way at the top that said UBS divest from mountaintop removal. And they were arrested and charged with trover, as well as the other charges. Then my group, what we did is we sat in front of the bank. A couple of us went down and hung a banner from the center of the bank and made a little bit of a nuisance of ourselves. And the security and police didn't like that, so they took us away and we spent the night in holding cells.
Here are a few photos and background comments that we broadcast about the Stamford action last December. On November 24th, UBS tried to pretty its image with a parade in Stamford. Folks from Hands Off Appalachia draped this banner to be visible on the route. The next day, two men climbed a crane working on a building opposite UBS headquarters and unfurled this banner. Then there was a banner drop inside the UBS headquarters. Dustin Steele and Ricky Draper locked down inside the building. 14 people were arrested, some far away from the buildings, all charged with conspiracy and other crimes. Bail ranged from $10,000 to $20,000. For more information, see handsoffappalachia.com. Now to more of Max Blumenthal's talk at Central Connecticut State University.
There is a logic behind this. There is a cold calculus behind it all, which is to move the residents of these villages, all unrecognized Bedouin villages, to what amount to Indian reservations, like the city of Rahat and the city of Hura. There are these 5 Arab towns which represent the only 5 Arab towns the State of Israel has built for Arabs since 1948, and they are built according to the organization that runs these towns, the Or Movement, a subsidiary of the Jewish National Fund, to concentrate the Bedouin population. This dark rhetoric of concentration is used openly on their website, and of course it has very disturbing resonances in Jewish history. It also has disturbing resonances in Native American history and in Japanese American history for the Japanese on the West Coast who were concentrated at Manzanar during World War II because they were deemed to possess enemy race blood. And that is the same logic behind the attempt to concentrate the Bedouin. An actual plan has been revealed and was debated in the Israeli Knesset to remove 40,000 to 70,000 Bedouin. It was called the Prover Plan. But what I saw in Al-Araqib was really the inception of this plan. That plan failed in the Knesset, by the way, thanks to a worldwide campaign of activism and enormous pressure inside the Knesset. It was one of the rare successes against this anti-democratic and racist agenda that I'm talking about right now. But it's been reintroduced. And there is really no reason to believe that this government will stop with its campaign to finish 48. We hear finish 48 in the words of this government, and we have to understand that that's the source of their popularity. We have to understand that when we look at Israeli Democracy Institute polls showing that a majority of Israeli youth would declare their refusal to sit in a classroom with an Arab citizen of Israel. That a majority of Israelis, according to these polls, which are taken every year, declare their refusal to live next door to an Arab or a non-Jewish migrant. We can understand this attitude in the poll produced by the Times of Israel, showing that a majority of Israelis believe that non-Jewish African refugees are a cancer in the national body. And we hear the mantra of Finish 48 in the dual letters issued by the key religious authorities of the State of Israel, hundreds of state-appointed rabbis declaring that it is illegal under Jewish law to rent apartments to non-Jews, and in the letter issued by their wives a week later declaring that it is illegal under Jewish law for Jewish women to date Arab men and for Jews to have relationships with non-Jews. This letter inspired a burgeoning anti-miscegenation movement led by the group Lahava, which maintains a hotline allowing callers to inform on interracial and interreligious couples, which maintains a civil patrol warning women on the beaches of Israel not to speak to Arab men, which distributes flyers warning Arab men not to speak to Jewish women in Jerusalem under penalty of extreme violence, which posts images around Jerusalem, which I've seen, of Arab men who have been accused of making passes at Jewish women or having relationships with them, and which recently successfully lobbied the National Civil Service Administration of Israel to bar religious Jewish women from volunteering in hospitals after 9 p.m. for fear that they would date Arab doctors. A decision endorsed by Economics Minister Naftali Bennett, leader of the third most popular party in Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, the Jewish Home Party. And an unusual decision, as I just said at my appearance at Quinnipiac, that for me as an American Jew is really unusual because I've been told my whole life that it's good to date doctors. Now, I spent a lot of time in Jerusalem in the last 4 years, in central Jerusalem, near Zion Square. I don't know how many of you have been able to visit there, but it's an area where there's a lot of pedestrian life, a lot of Jewish American tourists, a lot of settlers come there to shop. It's a very vibrant area, and it's a very homogeneously Jewish area. And one of the first documents I produced from there was this video, Feeling the Hate in Jerusalem, where I went out the night before Barack Obama's historic address in Cairo in 2009 and did man-on-the-street interviews. And I wound up in a series of bars talking to mostly Jewish Americans who were studying in the yeshivot and the Jewish institutions of learning in the area for a year, and having a good time being in Israel, experiencing their, getting in touch with their Jewish nationalistic identity that had been cultivated where they're from in the Five Towns area of Long Island. And they lined up before my camera in a competition for who could make the most racist statement about Obama, who they freely called a nigger, whose assassination they freely called for. One actually declared white power, and they kind of played off of each other. And they were being cheered on by others around them. And that video came out on YouTube, and within a few hours it had 500,000 views. And then the next thing I knew, it disappeared from YouTube, and it had disappeared from Vimeo, and the Huffington Post had banned it. And it was being pilloried by the entire world Jewish media, and at least the English-speaking Jewish media, from Haaretz to the Jerusalem Post, to commentators in the US, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency telling me to grow up. And I thought it was really serious what I showed there. And that it should have been taken as a warning and a challenge that something was happening inside Israel and it was impacting Jewish American life. And the challenge wasn't answered, it was simply suppressed. And what happened in Jerusalem, what I saw unfold as I continued to stay there, continued to visit there, and I lived in that area for several months, fulfilled my worst fears. What happened right in the middle of Zion Square in 2012 was the fulfillment of my nightmare when the 19-year-old Jamal Julani, who is a Palestinian 19-year-old kid, was walking through and beaten into a coma by over 30 Jewish teenagers who had heard that he had made a pass at a 15-year-old Jewish girl. And this beating occurred with hundreds of witnesses, and no one stepped in to do anything. And it was not the first of its kind. In fact, this was becoming a common phenomenon. It was an event that reminded me of the lynching of Emmett Till in the American South. And as William Faulkner said, the past is never dead. It isn't even past. We see that kind of Jim Crow mentality surfacing in Israel, encouraged by this anti-miscegenation movement. At the courthouse where the perpetrators for Julani were arraigned, one of them declared that his only regret was that he didn't beat him to death. The 15-year-old girl admitted that she had lied about Julani. And Benzi Gopstein, the head of the anti-miscegenation group, Lehava, proclaimed on Israeli national news that these perpetrators had lifted the national pride of Israel off the floor and done what the police had refused to do. And now Gopstein and his forces are turning towards a new threat, a new demographic contaminant, the 60,000 non-Jewish Africans who have come on harrowing treks across the Sinai Desert, fleeing Janjaweed and genocide in the Darfur region of Sudan, and finding a new Janjaweed in a country that they had been told would offer them sanctuary because it had embodied the lessons of the Holocaust. These African migrants have been denied work permits in Israel and concentrated in a very poor area in South Tel Aviv under the control of the right wing, forced often to sleep in the open in a park in the middle of this already heavily populated neighborhood, forced to live off of donated food in desperate conditions with no future, and then declared deemed by Benjamin Netanyahu a threat to the Jewish character of the state. They began facing race riots, open race riots in 2012 and 2013. May 23rd, it was May 23rd, 2012, top Israeli officials from Netanyahu's government gathered in South Tel Aviv before a crowd of 1,000. And Miri Regev, who is the chairperson of the Interior Committee of the Knesset, declared that Africans were a cancer in Israel's national body, while other speakers called for their immediate expulsion. Hours later, hundreds of right-wing Jewish vandals rampaged through African areas in South Tel Aviv, smashing windows and attacking any African they could find. They were stopped from a full-scale race riot only by the late deployment of the border police. Following these riots, a bill was passed in the Israeli Knesset amending the 1953 Anti-Infiltration Act. So this was already a bill that had been in place, declaring that all Palestinians who attempted to come back after 1948 were infiltrators, illegalizing their presence. And it had been amended to apply to the African population, of the non-Jewish African population, to allow their indefinite detention in a newly constructed internment camp in the desert, a camp that resembled Manzanar, in my opinion, and which former Speaker of the Knesset, Reuben Rivlin from the Likud party, freely called a concentration camp. There are currently thousands of non-Jewish Africans in this camp. It is called Holot, and they are being summoned each week and rounded up each week. But the government of Israel claims that this is a humane solution because the previous camp they had constructed was not much different from the kind of prisons that Palestinian prisoners are held in. But this camp has been deemed an open prison, an open center, and they are allowed to work inside the camp. And they're allowed to leave during the day. But they must check in and do roll call 3 times a day. And there's nowhere to go because they're in the middle of the desert. The only stipulation, besides the fact that they're denied work, is that they must sleep in this center at night, segregated from the Israeli public, for fear that they will assimilate. This is a very real fear that's impacting the lives of even Jewish Israelis. I have a close friend in Tel Aviv who is in a relationship with a man from Sudan, and she told me that I can't call him my boyfriend or my partner even though we're in love because we have no future. He will be deported or put in the camp, and then after he's sent back to Sudan, he'll probably be killed because he'll be seen as a traitor there. And this is the fear of all of the Sudanese refugees who have been engaged in a 2-week-long strike in Israel, marching by the tens of thousands in Tel Aviv, demanding refugee rights because they know if they're sent back, they could be killed. And the state of Israel has denied them any path to asylum because they're not Jewish, while I have the right of return simply because I have J-positive blood. So with this new alternative solution, this new humane solution, the open prison, once again, a kind of Jim Crow era policy has surfaced in this country that Barack Obama, the product of the civil rights movement, the first African-American president, says is a vibrant democracy and an unshakable ally of the U.S. In the 1920s and 30s across the U.S., including in a suburb of Washington, D.C. called Chevy Chase, ordinances were put in place forbidding the presence of African Americans after dark. And with this new facility, which requires non-Jewish Africans to sleep segregated from the Israeli public after dark, Benjamin Netanyahu and his government has made Israel the largest sundown town in the world. That's what these towns with these ordinances in the U.S. were called, sundown towns. And so much of what I've talked about, in fact, almost all of what I've talked about tonight takes place inside the Green Line. I didn't talk really about the West Bank yet, which is occupied by the Israeli military. I didn't talk yet about the Gaza Strip. I'm talking right now about, and this is where most of my book takes place, I'm talking about the area that will be legitimized by a two-state solution. The Palestinian Authority has been asked, in fact, the demand of the U.S. government is that the Palestinian Authority recognize Israel as a Jewish state, which will legitimize and consolidate all of the trends of institutional discrimination and their impact, everything that I have listed and elucidated today. And not only that, besides this very onerous demand, which would be like asking American Jews to recognize the United States as a white Christian nation, John Kerry has pretty much accepted the two-state solution on Netanyahu's terms. He has called for a new wall to be built on the Jordanian border, which according to Israeli Army radio would imprison the Palestinians between two walls, since there already is a wall cutting deep into the West Bank. He's called for Israeli troops to maintain a long-term presence in the Jordan Valley, which is represents some of the only arable land in the West Bank and would be the heart of a Palestinian state. So there'll be Israeli troops there. Israel gets to implant spying systems throughout the West Bank, which John Kerry has referred to as early warning systems. This will be a boon to the Israeli and American private security industry, but it will keep the Palestinians in a Gazified panopticon that people in the Gaza Strip are already suffering under, and the Israeli military will have control over the West Bank's airspace, which will allow them to patrol the West Bank with drones, which they already do in the Gaza Strip. Israel will get the major settlement blocks under Kerry's framework agreement, which represent 80% of the settler population in the West Bank. And Benjamin Netanyahu has declared that Israel will also receive Beit El, which is a religious nationalist settlement that cuts deep into the West Bank. He's demanded that Israel not pull out of Hebron, which is far away from the Green Line, which represents some of the most extreme settlements in the West Bank. So the question is, if all of this goes through, according to Kerry's framework agreement, what of a Palestinian state will be left? What it looks like from all the details that have leaked out through the negotiators on both sides is that the West Bank will resemble Ariel Sharon's vision of a pastrami sandwich, which is what he sought to create, which is what he said he sought to create when he began authorizing the settlement enterprise. Now, politically, it is impossible for Israel to even enact anything resembling a two-state solution. Netanyahu's coalition will collapse if any settlers pull out, because Naftali Bennett from the Jewish Home Party, the economics minister, has said he'll pull out. Avigdor Lieberman has demanded that Israel redraw the borders of the Palestinian Authority to strip 300,000 Palestinian citizens of Israel of their citizenship who live near the Green Line in the Arab Triangle. So there would have to be some kind of clause allowing transfer in the two-state solution. I don't even know how the U.S. could accept that. And a majority of Israelis, according to a Times of Israel poll, are against any settler pullout. Not only that, a majority of Israelis declared that they want new allies in the Obama era. And at the same time, 70% of Jewish Israelis said they don't know where they'll find those new allies. So Israel is in a situation where it can do nothing but maintain its occupation and manage its system of apartheid and continue all of the trends that I just described. And so that really should challenge you. What are you going to do about that? What can you do as Americans, as the key financiers of this entire project? $233 billion from Americans to Israel over the last 50 years, and $30 billion over the next 10 years is pledged. What will you do? Now, you can disagree with my conclusions, and I don't pull any punches about what I think should be done, but what I don't think you can disagree with is that these trends are unacceptable, they're repellent, and that they are the result of the U.S.-imposed status quo. And so the status quo needs to be challenged, and it needs to be challenged here in the U.S. So that's really what I will leave you with. And from there, we can take some questions. Thank you.
Before I go, I want to talk about an audio interview I did with Lenni Brenner, a historian, activist, and an astute observer of the U.S. Jewish community. We talk about the Pew Report on U.S. Jews and what it found out about intermarriage and Jewish views about Israel, some of which are quite surprising. You can hear it on YouTube or on our podcast. Here's a taste.
When I say that a majority of young Jews marry Gentiles, I assure you a majority of the young Jews who marry Gentiles do not marry Christian Zionists. Right. They laugh at them, you know.
A final note, your Congress has passed the Farm Bill, cutting $8 billion out of food stamps, an average loss to poor families of $90 a month. At the same time, your Congress generously gave the Israeli generals a ton of extra money last December. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.